please welcome to the stage my wonderful panelists. We have David Esser, who is the Chief Product Officer at Minterest, and Maria Palma, who is General Partner at Kindred Capital. Please, a round of applause for my wonderful guests. So, here we go. We've got 30 minutes to talk about the wonder of things around Web3, but in this discussion, specifically about creating an inclusive financial future, bringing in this idea of sustainability into the idea as well. So why are we going to talk about inclusivity and sustainability? Very good, thank you. In this idea of Web3, so that's what we're going to kind of discuss together. To start that, I think just to provide some context, short introduction for each of you. Maria, for you, thank you.
Sure. So Maria Palma, I'm a general partner at Kindred Capital. Started my career in corporate America and then weaved over into startups a bit abroad in India and Brazil, and then in the New York ecosystem. I spent 5 years at a fund in New York. I went down the crypto rabbit hole in 2015 when Bitcoin was $200. But no, I did not buy enough to have a Lamborghini. But I got in the ecosystem then, and so I've been around it since then, first in New York and then now at a fund out of London that invests all over Europe.
She bought enough for 2 Lamborghinis. No, that's fantastic. David.
Yeah, so been building technical systems since the early days of the internet, participating in some of the early cryptocurrency or some of the early e-commerce solutions. And so later on, co-founding a couple companies, and now working for Minterest, which is a lending protocol on blockchain. And so just excited to be here and talk about the future of blockchain.
Super cool. Well, since it does kind of, the Web3 part we're going to focus on is maybe a little more on the DeFi side, but we're going to talk about several things. Who here feels confident with their understanding of what DeFi means, what decentralized finance is? Raise your hand. Okay. So the quick version, the definition of that, just to kind of get it out there. So decentralized finance is just like traditional finance, except not top down from large organizations like your banks or insurers or things like that. So if you want to have interest by loaning money, if you want to have a savings account, if you want to trade assets like stocks or things like that, if you want to crowdfund something, if you want insurance, all of these financial business models in that world we can do in a decentralized way, leveraging basically the capital between each other as crypto as the tool. So that's why the decentralized concept kind of pieces into that. There's not necessarily a top-down organization. So Minterest is a platform that helps facilitate that. My thought, before we dive into some details maybe about some of the other points we want to talk about, why are we sitting here talking about financial inclusion thanks to Web3? What are your thoughts on why that matters?
I think it matters because we can go into DeFi later and how much of it is really decentralized and where are we in the journey. But I think the ultimate vision is that there's a lot of people who are underbanked. There's a lot of people who want access to better products. And in many ways, this technology can enable that. I think at the most basic form, right, just take Bitcoin as an example because most people are familiar. If you're living in Argentina or Venezuela, it is literally the first time in history that you can decide to store your wealth in the same thing that the richest person in the world can decide to store their wealth in the same currency. You don't have to worry about devaluation, and there are pros and cons to that when it's as volatile as it is today, which is why there's a lot of stable coins at the moment. But I think if you look at the opportunity, especially in emerging markets, but more globally, for people to have less transaction fees and be able to have a better consumer experience at the end of the day and better access to finance without spending so much money, it's an incredible way to have financial inclusion. And even actually sitting in Estonia, it's very relevant. If you think about Coinbase or any of the platforms like that, if you're not transacting in the USD or Euro, I guess probably more of a thing for Poland than Estonia, actually, now I'm saying it out loud, but like you have to sometimes tie into local rails and it can be way more expensive and take way longer for you to actually just deploy a simple trade. I think it's about making finance available to everyone more easily and more cheaply, quite frankly.
David?
Yeah, so I mean, DeFi is like a subset of blockchain, right? So it has to do with kind of replicating conceptually portions of traditional finance in the blockchain world. And so the thing about what's happened so far is that it's primarily, I call it navel gazing. The whole industry is just kind of focused inward. And so we're starting to replicate things like lending and borrowing and trading things, exchanges, and even complex things like derivatives where you're having complex derivative solutions for trading things. But it's all still focused on the crypto world. It's all internal navel gazing. And so what matters from my perspective for inclusivity is we have to get everyone else in. As you said, most of the world is not fully banked yet, and I would even argue that even for the portions of the world that are banked, the options that they have aren't really designed for their benefit. They are designed and built to benefit the people who release them. They're benefiting the banks. And I'm not saying that all banks are evil, but it's also, I think, true that those solutions aren't really designed around the needs or the benefit of the people who use them. And so with decentralized finance and in blockchain, we have the ability to design protocols, to design solutions, which we can give folks to use that are actually designed around the benefit of those people. And the reason that works in blockchain and potentially not in other scenarios is because when you're creating a new currency around an ecosystem, then the growth of simply the participation in an ecosystem increases the value of that. And so that's a different whole value model that hasn't existed before, and it allows people to build things for users and have it actually be entirely oriented around the benefit of the user, because if they use it, then value increases. So to my mind, this is why inclusivity matters. We need to build things built around the interests of the user, and stop staring at our own belly buttons and build things that more people can use.
And so to that point, decentralization is the underlying theme of where the difference with Web3. So I don't know if you were here for the panel earlier, but if we want to define Web3 in a very easy way, but there's so many ways to define it, Web 1 was the read web, according to Tim Berners-Lee from creating the internet. It's the internet was giving us information in the 90s, so it was top down. And the Web 2 was the read-write web, where we were able to also publish to the web. We can now publish on Facebook, on YouTube, have a blog. So it was this participative kind of creator economy version of that. And Web 3 is the read, write, execute web, meaning that not only can we read and write, but now we have a distributed system where we're able to do that without the top-down platforms, but also leveraging things like smart contracts and artificial intelligence and all the different things that we're seeing around machine learning and different approaches to allow the technology to think and to make decisions. And that is where Web3 kind of takes us to a place where it's a much smarter internet, but with a very clear decentralized layer to enable many of those things. So that doesn't necessarily mean crypto. But how do we do decentralization if it's not crypto? But that's really the idea there of what we're getting. So to that point, how decentralized really is decentralized finance?
So I think today it's not really as decentralized as you would like. There's a lot, people love to throw the word DeFi around, and it depends on which protocol you're on, right? Like Bitcoin is by definition a lot more decentralized, and so Lightning is probably more decentralized, but then it depends on what you build. But I think the answer is it doesn't necessarily matter, right? It depends on what use case you're solving and how you best solve that use case. And today, there's governments and regulations, so if you're gonna off-ramp and on-ramp into fiat, you do have KYC, AML, but I think we're getting new rails is the important part. You're getting new infrastructure that enables you to basically choose. You could do it in a centralized way, you could do it in a decentralized way. And I think that I don't really like calling it DeFi just because I feel like I think about it as regulated and unregulated, and in both use cases, there are incredible opportunities. And I think just to give you some color on that, like a lot of the use cases today have treated any of these things, Bitcoin, Ethereum, as almost an asset per se and programmable money. But one way that I was told by a founder to think about it, which I like, is the internet is basically text and you have money on top of it, right? It's a text-based protocol. You can send information for free and you have money on top of it. That's why you have big companies like Stripe and PayPal. But actually, the way that you build Web3 is essentially a money protocol with text on top of it. So like there's messaging apps on top of these protocols, but it just fundamentally changes the way that you can create really great user experiences. Like you can actually create opportunities for people to earn money completely outside of gaming as well. Like it creates completely new opportunities. So I think it's not so much how much is decentralized today or not, which I think there will be pieces that will be and pieces that they won't be, but a decentralized database is not always better for what you're trying to do. And when you're trying to have security and great user experience, I think you need to think through the trade-offs depending on what you're trying to build.
I think one of the interesting things that we talked about the financial inclusivity, so we can talk about the unbanked or other ways that this will allow for people who have been not able to access the traditional financial systems, which differ around the world, but there's always a barrier that underneath that it's just not profitable for the bank or others to work with you. So that's a huge piece. But you also just touched on another point, which is the UX, or the visual, the way that you interface with most of Web3. If any of you, who here has bought an NFT? Who here has minted an NFT off of a website? Okay, so just a few of you. And the problem there is many more of you may have wanted to do that, but the UX sucks. Like, it's horrible. Like, you go to these websites and it's just the graphic design is terrible, or you click on the button and it doesn't do what you thought it was supposed to do. And we cannot have scale in Web3 if it is that version. The entire reason that the platform version of Web2 it converts so well between people wanting something and getting something is because the process is incredibly optimized now. So we have to get over that to be inclusive of everyone, not just financially, but just anybody who wants to participate in this. So David, maybe to the same idea then, though, just around this idea of the decentralization piece still, how do we fix that? How do we become more decentralized? How decentralized should we be as a goal?
Yeah, and decentralization affects user interface a lot too. I completely agree with what you mentioned. Stepping back a second, what's decentralization and why would it matter? And so decentralization in blockchain is building things from components which aren't centralized. They function independently in the sort of this group orientation. And so, well, why would that matter? What would we want from decentralization? And we can actually even go back to the internet and say, why did we do the internet? We had a phone system. We could transmit things. And so the reason we did the internet way back when, the reason it was important is because it took any message and it broke it up into a million little pieces. And it sent those pieces out into the network, and then they would all go, and they all knew generally where they should go, and then they would arrive at their destination and get reassembled. And they were broken up in a way that the arriving destination could tell if anything was missing. And so the arriving destination would say, yeah, got it all except for piece number 197. I would like that. And it would ask for that missing piece, and then it would all be assembled. And the email that you sent got broken apart into a bunch of different pieces and then reassembled. And what that meant is that nobody could stop it. It was an unstoppable network. You could have an accidental shutdown of any multiple nodes, or an intentional, bomb television companies, and those messages could still get through. And so decentralization in this world where we're starting to have computing power as part of these solutions means that hopefully that it can't be stopped, and also that it can't be controlled by any one entity. So this goes to, why would we want decentralization? Because I'm going to get to it in a minute. It's really kind of a pain in the ass. So the reason that we would want it, the promise that people are making from blockchain and decentralization is that, wow, we could have solutions that no one entity controls. And so, I'll give you an example. Why would that matter? Well, say coffee producers in Ethiopia. It's an environment where you have many small participants in that ecosystem. Some of them grow it, some of them just roast it, some of them just ship it, some of them just market it, some of them sell it overseas. There are a bunch of small participants. And they would all benefit from having one centralized system where they could have that whole supply chain enabled. But how would you do that? Because the only entities with the money to build a solution like that, well, everyone would be worried about them controlling it. The smallholders would never participate in that because they would believe that would get corrupted somehow, and they're going to end up getting a bad deal out of it. So in a decentralized scenario, you could have something created, but it's released freely onto the blockchain. And then everyone can see what its code is. Everyone can validate that it's functioning the way that it ought to, and it's not controlled by any centralized entity, which means that the small little grower or the small little shipper or the small little packager can participate in that system with trust. And that enables the entire ecosystem to work together. So there's a whole bunch of use cases like this, where if it's not controlled by one central entity, then a lot more things can happen. People can collaborate in new ways. So that's the promise of decentralization. But the trouble with that is systems that work in these decentralized environments, well, they just don't really work very well yet. And so it feels very similar to me. In the early days of building internet solutions, I participated in the early building of some of the first e-commerce of, say, like Nike or Intel. And to be frank, it didn't really work. It was shit. And so we really struggled and wrestled to build anything that could be used at scale, anything that you could release outside of the boundaries of a prototyping group. But however, over the years, it started to work. And so this is kind of where we are now. In order to build things which people can use at scale, we're starting to use some centralized pieces within a decentralized environment because those components are needed. But they're centralized. And so those of us who believed in centralization are a little bit tormented by this because we would like to build fully decentralized systems. They can't be controlled by anyone. They can't be stopped. You could blow up, various nodes. But at the moment, we're still in this semi-decentralized.
If we looked at like a decentralized crypto exchange, meaning that it's not an organization, there's not a company behind there for you to go call or deal with. It's somebody who has created this interface that allows you to swap between one crypto to another and to be able to transact in that space. Well, now we think, oh, that's a fully decentralized system, except estimates are 40% of Ethereum runs on Amazon Web Services.
That's right.
So that's not exactly decentralized.
And actually, arguably, you have the huge growth of NFTs, right? But actually, if you look at it, a lot of NFTs aren't actually minted on chain. There's a pointer, which means somewhere they're being stored in the cloud in some sort of Amazon Web Services
visual
backed
image
server.
is on IPFS, which is somewhere that's sitting on a server, distributed, but still, yeah. And so I think that's. So when we talk about inclusivity and we look at the decentralization, that's important because it also means we need to be onboarding more people, everyone, for it to be inclusive. But to do that, we have to have we have to have tools that work well enough that people, that they're efficient and that they actually convert well. But that means they need to be good. And if they're good, that means are they built by a single company, or are they built if you want to go on OpenSea and deal with NFTs, well, you probably use a MetaMask wallet. Well, that's Consensus. That's a company. If you want to do Solana stuff and you're using your Phantom wallet, the fact that most of that has to be siloed into a particular technology, probably not bad that that's the case, but we're not exactly dealing with hundreds or thousands of different choices to do the same thing. So not truly decentralized. So do we need to be? Maybe not, but we need to make sure that we keep good actors, good faith in that space, that we encourage that to continue happening. So maybe let's take a look at this a little bit differently and tackle maybe the sustainability side of this, but also with the inclusivity side still there, and talk about community. If we mentioned NFTs a little bit, the concept behind a lot of these projects that we're seeing, whether it's a 10,000 in particular animals for some whatever NFT project. And again, if you don't know much about NFTs, it's probably not about the picture itself. It's probably about the community that is behind it. It's probably about the access or the extra whatever that having that particular NFT, that asset gives you. It's not just the picture itself. So let's talk about the community side of this. What do you see as the need there for us to continue to move forward and scale Web3 adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually one of our companies that we backed said this. It's community is layer 0. There's literally this conversation, layer 1 is the protocol layer like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and then you have layer 2 technologies that help you scale. And we invest in a lot of infrastructure that enables us to scale, back to your point about the timing of how long this takes. But everything in Web3 is community-based, right? People have their own groups, they're on their own Discord chats, and it's really about bringing together like-minded people, and it doesn't have to be people who look alike or people who know each other. It's people who share an interest in something, or people who share a passion or a cause. And I think that as we watch this play out, it's going to be super transformative. So the same way that we couldn't tell at the early days of the internet what the future use cases would be, we're probably in the same boat on that. We don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but I think if you have community at the center, as long as that community is very inclusive, I think it can be a great way to bring more people into the space. And even if you look at adoption in the last year, I think it was 2x the number of, if you looked at the stats of who owned cryptocurrencies from like a gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic lens, it's pretty horrible, but it's also gotten a lot better in the last year. I think as we make products easier to use and we have more mainstream adoption and these communities are very inclusive, they're gonna need different tools to scale, but it'll be hopefully a much better future in terms of what people are able to do.
Yeah, crypto and DeFi have been terribly overly masculine in terms of that side of things, and not a lot of female entrepreneurs in this space necessarily. The NFT space has really dramatically changed that because a ton of people in the Web3 space around community projects with social tokens and NFTs, a lot of these are female-led projects or other diversity or inclusive projects. So I think that we're starting to see that finally balance out a bit and get better. A lot more of the panels are not just guys on stage talking about crypto and their Lamborghinis. Houdini. So I think that that's super important that we get to that space. David, for you, thoughts on, because I mean, you're much more on the technology side of enabling this, but as the chief product officer, obviously these things have to be usable. They have to have a high conversion rate. They have to be efficient. So what are your thoughts on the community side of this?
On the NFT front, it's useful to kind of take a step back about what it fundamentally is. So far, it's been pretty digital pictures that you can prove that you own. And that's an interesting use case. And that'll always be there. There'll be memes that'll be exciting and interesting. And who knows, it'll be very difficult to predict what's successful, but there will be that. But fundamentally, like this NFT stands for non-fungible token. It's like a digital certificate. And you can use a certificate for all sorts of things. You can prove that you own it. So certificates can be used to give you rights. So for example, in our own solution at Minterest, if you own a certain NFT of certain categories, you can, when you're utilizing Minterest, which is a lending protocol, then you can get additional benefits, additional rewards, additional permissions to access other things. But it can go beyond that. I read recently there's a television show, and if you own one of their NFTs, then you can be one of the people who votes on the future of the story. So coming back to community and NFTs, right? So you can decide, well, this is a pretty interesting television story. I like it. And actually, I got so into it now, I kind of care where that storyline goes. I'm going to buy one of those NFTs, and now I'm one of the 10,000 people who's voting, that so-and-so should move to this town and become friends with so-and-so. And so you can imagine all manner of scenarios where it's not just pictures. The fact that you can prove you own a picture is one interesting use case. But if you had a digital certificate that you can prove ownership of from anywhere in the world, what could you do with that? And so more and more NFTs are going to be about the functionality you can attach to them and what rights does it give you as a member of certain communities.
The visual side of it is what really, I think, creates the attraction to the project. And I'm actually looking for my stoner cat because you mentioned stoner cats. And I obviously can't show it to you here, so you can't see it, but it's a little cat who, mine does not currently have marijuana, but most of them do. And Stoner Cats is the TV show you're talking about, or one of them. It's Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher. It's an animated TV show. And if you want to watch it, you have to own one of the NFTs to be able to go to the website and log in using the NFT as an access to be able to get early access to watch the show. And then you can also participate in the community around how that show evolves. It's a fascinating example of how to bring a community even closer into a concept. So it's a great example of how these things can work. I think that's we get really hung up on the valuations of a lot of where NFTs have been, and because we see that and we don't understand how something could be worth $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 as just a silly picture on Twitter. But yeah, that's the point is not the artwork at all, and we're going to see this more and more as this moves forward because NFTs are much more than the visual side. So musicians are doing a ton of stuff in this space. We're going to see a lot more of NFTs around that space. Tons of NFTs being used for luxury goods, for example. So maybe you've got your little Prada bag, or and you want to be able to have more access or like value attached to that. And so now LVMH has their own blockchain that will allow them to attach an NFT, a digital certificate basically to each of those products. You could go to the website and log in because you own the bag. Or you could go to an event and get special. I mean, you can see the physical product, but there's ways to blend the digital and the physical because of these things. We're seeing that in events, your ticket to a conference or to a music, like a show or whatever might happen to also be an NFT, gets you special access, gets you special content that you can download. It's all about what you get through the access and not actually the visual itself.
It may actually be worth touching on too, because a lot of the examples we're using here and a lot of things people think about are virtual, for better lack of a better word, examples. Things in the metaverse, things online, you can access a show, you can access, but it's also offline stuff, right? I think there's a company called Stackwork that has, I believe it's like 68 countries and around 50,000 employees. And what they do is, I served on the board for many years of a nonprofit in Africa that works with refugee founders. And I can tell you, if you're in rural Africa or rural Indonesia or rural Venezuela, your options for a job are not great, honestly, right? Maybe there's agriculture, maybe your parents have a stand, but there's not a lot of options for you. They're going to these places and giving you a smartphone instead of a feature phone. And you're unlocking that phone by doing data labeling jobs. So, you're doing it for some enterprise that you probably don't know who the enterprise is, but you're just basically doing these basic data tasks on the phone. And then you pay the phone back, and then you just earn that way. So now you have a completely different income, and it's not in gaming, it's not in the metaverse. Like, you are doing something on a phone, but most of the people who are using it don't even actually understand or care about crypto. They're just trading it into their mobile credits and into their actual, like, having money in the local currency. And he's grown to all of those employees, tens of thousands, with zero marketing, because it's community based, because people are like, I'm making way more money doing this and I want to give it to my friend, and then they bring their friend. And so I think it's not only enabling community in terms of traditional Web 2 or I guess Web 3 metaverse and these online experiences, but also offline as well, which is an important point.
Please, David.
It's just along those lines, we want those communities to be able to participate. But when I think of the solutions that are out there for now in the decentralized finance world, to me it's sort of like, if you get in a small plane on the runway and just shove the throttle forward, that thing will get into the air. But if there's no instruments, they can't actually fly it. And so this is the way I experience most existing solutions in the decentralized finance world, where people can participate, but there isn't enough information there for the user to participate in a way that they know they can stay financially healthy. I don't think that they're helped enough in that regard, and I think it's kind of a characteristic across the industry. And it goes to, if more people are going to be participating, if we're going to stop just staring at our own navels, we need to build interfaces which allow people to understand what they're doing more easily and participate in those activities more safely, so they don't have to care about crypto. They just interact on a phone and it just works.
One of the questions in the panel earlier that somebody posted was, when are we going to really see people paying for things in crypto? And I'm pretty sure, in my opinion, the answer is never, because it's not important. We already are now tapping our phones to pay for all of our stuff or to do our things. What's happening behind that transaction is unimportant. If that's euros going between my app to whatever is going on, if that's some other a startup like TransferWise from here, for example, a scale-up that has created other ways for capital to move from one place to another, or if it's using some kind of a crypto to accomplish that with a lower fee or faster structure, what does it matter? I'm pretty sure nobody's going to end up buying a Starbucks coffee for 0.0001 Bitcoin. If we don't work that way, the math doesn't, that's not how this works. But that doesn't mean that eventually the apps, the infrastructure couldn't be based on these technologies, so it will be powered by them. We just don't need to care that it's actually happening through those things. So maybe the last point to touch on, just to connect this sustainability idea, is that if we do build this wonderful utopic future where finance is accessible to everyone and is cheaper and safer and more transparent, we also can't let it wreck them when something like last week's garbage happened with Luna. So if you're not in the crypto space, you don't have no idea that something terrible happened last week in crypto, which is why everything's really cheap and depressed right now. But without going into the details, the lesson was basically, if you're investing, never invest in one thing. Don't put all of your stuff into one basket. I have complete empathy for people who lost all of their everything. However, that's bad investment. If you don't put all of your stuff in just one single thing, and if that thing disappears, you've lost everything. So the point is crypto is a safe future, but we need to take some careful, because in Web3, important rule, there is no customer service. If you want decentralized services, there's no one to call. So when it goes bad, we have a problem. What are your thoughts then about the sustainability side of making sure we don't wreck people by creating this non-supervised version of the financial world?
One of the keys, and that's a perfect example, right? So if you take what happened recently and try to think of a metaphor in the traditional world, basically what was going on there, think if someone builds a really big mall and they say, well, how do we get people to come to the mall? Well, let's just offer the money. Everyone who comes and walks through the mall is going to get $50. It's going to be a pretty crowded mall, right? Hey, it's Saturday, let's go make $50, walk through the mall. But if there's not any actual economic activity there, then it has to collapse at some point, because all you're doing is sort of giving away, and eventually that's going to run out. So you've built this really crowded mall, and that's kind of what happened. That protocol wasn't built for long-term sustainability. Eventually, things were going to have to, there would be the end of it. And people who looked into it in detail, well, they knew. Yeah, that's just everyone who was investing that was thinking, I just don't want to be the last one off the boat. But implicit in there is that a whole bunch of people are going to lose their money. And so if we want things to be sustainable in the long term, we have to build protocols whose overall design is that they continue in the long term. And people have been building protocols whose sole purpose was to, in a very short term, go very steeply up. And that's actually not that's not a very friendly thing to do for your users. You have to build things which are going to be sustainable in the long term.
Yeah, building for speculation and gambling is not sustainable. I think there are other stablecoins that are backed, by U.S. Treasuries, for example. And so I think that in that particular case, it was not designed for sustainability. And we do have to think about that going forward. And this may be an unpopular opinion. I do think there are unregulated use cases that are really interesting that will stay unregulated and stay truly decentralized, like the one I mentioned earlier about getting paid in rural areas for work. But I think that the quicker regulation comes in on the stuff that's going to have regulation ultimately, the better off we're going to actually have consumers protected as well. So I think you're going to need both, and you're going to need to design for sustainability, and I think you will need to design for customer service. Today, there's nothing. You're going to need use cases for what if I forget my password, which happens all the time, and what if I sent the wrong, like right now, if you send one wrong digit, you're not getting your money back. Like that's going to be millions, hundreds of millions of people are not going to be okay with that answer. So we're going to have to design for that.
This was brilliant. Thank you for your time. Lots of other things to talk about in this subject, so we've got other great content today and tomorrow. If by some chance the NFT and social token conversation interests you, I do have a keynote tomorrow morning on the decentralized creator economy, so would love to see you there for that. And if you want to play in that world, since most of you have never done an NFT, go to my Twitter. It's Ethan Pierce with an S, and I will send you, there's a link, there's the first tweet there. I will send you some free Ethan social tokens on Rally, and I'll send you an NFT that says you are at Latitude. So happy to do that. Just go there and click on the link and make it happen. But it was super great to get to have this chat. Thank you so much for your time. Please, a round of applause for my rockstar panelists.